So yeah, we're LogSentinel. We are a cybersecurity vendor. We provide a SIEM, a next-gen SIEM, if such a category existed in Gartner. I'll skip through the customer slides, award slides, SIEM slides, whatever, and focus on the things that matter. So first, in terms of the pricing model, it's something that is different about us. We price by the number of active users in the organization, not by volume, not by assets. All of those metrics, they're fine, they're logical, but all of them try to estimate the size of the organization that is a customer. We want to estimate that size with a much simpler metric to obtain. Because if you want to estimate the gigabytes per month or gigabytes per day or events per second, it's a project in itself. You have to have log collection in the first place to do some estimate there. So you just go to the Active Directory, sometimes even run a very simple script to extract a single number, or count the number of employees in the organization, also works. And then you give us that and we'll give you a quote, or our partner gives you a quote. The good thing about that is it's easy to get, but also predictable. It doesn't go up twice just because you've switched on some auditing policy in Windows Server. So it kind of stays relatively stable. In terms of deployment, we are very flexible, which kind of mirrors the situation around the world. We have American partners, and they said, it looks like from the outside that in America everything's in the cloud. Everyone's in the cloud. No, nothing happens on-premise anymore. That's not the case. There's still a lot of customers that prefer on-prem. That's why we have both options of deployment. So you can get it on-prem as a virtual appliance, or you can get our SaaS. We run on AWS, so even localization requirements, if such exist, can be met. And about the other components, apart from the SIEM server, we have a collector, as most SIEM products have. This collector is always installed on-premise. It has to have kind of a foothold in the infrastructure to be able to collect all of the logs and other events. And we have an optional agent which can be installed on some endpoints or all endpoints. I'll show that in a bit. So that's the dashboard. We have a dark theme as well. Just looks on screen, I think, slightly better that way. And that's the overview of the events. You can even have stuff like trend lines, reports on that activity, the overall numbers of activities, the usual things that are nice to have. Charts, which are customizable. You can create any chart based on custom queries. And then obviously the important part, the events and all of the queries that you can perform there. So this is a demo account with a couple of kind of popular sources. So we have a firewall, an Active Directory, some custom business application, Microsoft 365, SAP, and website access logs. And we present the data in an audit log way, not just a bunch of parameters that have nothing to do with each other, but we always think that an activity, an audit log, a log has an actor. Sometimes that's quite an obvious actor. It's a user, Lisa Davis at organization.com. Sometimes it's an external IP and you don't know who's behind that, but it's still an actor. That actor always does something. In the case of GCP, it can be deleting an instance. In the case of a firewall, it can be just opening a connection. You don't know what else they're doing. In the case of a website access log, it's posting or getting to a particular URI. But in all of these cases, or in case of Active Directory, there's special privilege assigned, all of these events. In practically every case, you can extract at least an actor and an action. And obviously all of the other parameters are available over here. And you can search by, needless to say, all of them. So you can say, give me all of the activities with that IP that contain that IP for this period of time for these and these data sources, or for any data source if you're interested. You can do everything's auto completed, so you can say I want to get things by geo country code, which is China. You can auto complete the China. Let me just move stuff around a little bit, right? And yeah, you get all the Chinese traffic. I mean, that sounds nice. It's not as useful, but for example, we have customers in the US, and they say there's nobody has any business doing stuff with Chinese IPs here. We except probably someone trying to obviously hit the firewall, but we should have a rule that says if there's a Chinese IP or non-US IP, you can do negation here as well. If there's any non-US IP that's detected somewhere in our Active Directory, Exchange, wherever, it alerts us immediately. Kind of obvious things, but you can do that with that. There is something interesting over here, which is this thing in the parentheses. This is the normalized action. So each source has its way of representing events. Delete instance for GCP is v1 compute instance delete. Deleting a user is a Windows event that's called delete. We map all of these things that we know of or that make some sense to some normalized set of actions. Create, retrieve, update, delete, authentication success, authentication failure, connection success, connection dropped, and the list goes on. So that you can basically do queries across sources through these normalized actions and see what may be happening. The other thing that we normalize is parameter names. Every source has its own way to represent parameters. So it's a method name, resource name, IPs are coded in many different ways. For example, this I think is a Sonic Wall firewall, and the IPs are SRC and DST. In other firewalls, it's SRC IP, it's source IP, whatever. We normalize all of these things to params.source IP, params.destination IP. We also extract external IP and internal IP. For each event, you may have, may not have, but you may have an external IP. And this is very useful for defining rules that span multiple sources. I want to get rules that do something with external IPs regardless of which brand of firewall that is. So data normalization is something that happens behind the scenes, but is very useful in practice. These queries, you can combine a lot of things here. So you can use ands and ors. So did this country and this IP. You can even have kind of a nested queries. It will be hard for me to do that with a single hand, but let me open the documentation to just show what's the idea. It's in the user manual, dashboard, search, and you have nested queries. So basically you have params.some parameter value, and then another parameter equals, and then there's a nested query. So we basically execute the first query, then get all of the results, and then transform that to something like an in query, which says if parameter 2 is within either of these values, and parameter 1 is this value, then do something. In some cases, parameters cannot be properly normalized, so you maybe want to jump from detecting a URL in one appliance and mapping it to the URL in the other appliance, and sometimes they didn't get properly normalized, or even if they did. So you may have these nested queries. Apart from plain queries and nested queries, we support SQL. To be honest, this is supported solely for tenders which require SQL support. It's much less useful, but yeah, you can write basically select from which source and then parameter name equals parameter value. Then you have the group by. These are the ad hoc reports. You can say I want to get the top actor IDs over here for, let's say, Microsoft 365. And you'll see that these two users in the demo account, it's a very small organization with 2 users, they performed this number of activities. And of course, the second layer of grouping by, let's see what they did, what are their top actions. This user accessed files, they share files, this one downloaded files. So let's check back and see what are these file shares, which might be suspicious. And in this case, it's not the firewall. So yeah, and you get all the file shares. You get the chart above updated with the current query. So you will be noticing some spikes. You can drill down over here, and the events below will be updated. So that you basically see what this user has been sharing and why, and maybe it's an anomaly. You can save these reports and schedule them for, let's say, weekly sending in PDF to this set of emails. You can also do other stuff, like if you, for example, we do that on the firewall, you get the number of requests by IP, but you may want to get the sum of the bytes received. So every parameter is parsed as a number as well as a keyword. So if it is a number, you can do numeric stuff on it. So you can give me the sum of the bytes received for that IP, or give me the max or the min or the average, and save that report as well. You can customize that further. You can exclude some things with a filter query. You can get them in reverse order, basically saying which are the most rare process IDs, the most rare process names, the most rare activities by a given user. Because if you check your least active users, it may turn out that, well, it's an employee that left a while ago, but their account is still doing something worth investigating, worth blocking the account. So all of these things, they can be scheduled, as I said. We have built-in group by reports. I'll show them in a bit. Then you have the flows. This is collection of sflow, netflow, jflow, and ipfix. And it's a typical, source, destination, port, and then whatever useful that we have found to extract. In the flows tab, we also send flows that we have generated from our raw packets. So if we listen to the local interface on the collector machine and a switch has been mirrored to send all of the traffic to that local interface, we get all of those basically pickups and transform those into flows as well. And if they're plain text, we extract stuff from them. If they're not plain text, we only extract the headers. We have some other nice visual things like per hour aggregations on the number of events per month, per week, per data source, and some immediate answers to questions with numbers. So give me the maximum of bytes received for a given source, or give me the sum of the bytes received for that source. Sometimes it's useful. I'll skip the charts. Well, not skip them, but just show you they are defined by queries. The same query that you have used in the query bar, you can put it here, say that I want to get the top 10 entries in the chart, or the top 50. Say specify an aggregation field. You can use any parameter for that, and choose the chart type. It's horizontal, line, radar, pi, whatever. Width, height, and colors if needed, and you want to show it on the dashboard, or show it on the custom dashboards. The custom dashboards are basically a combination of charts and of saved searches and some group by reports, which you can combine on the screen. I think we have a demo dashboard with just a few charts, non-US IPs, top Active Directory events, and then the saved search. That's a very simplified view. The threat map, we have it here entirely for demo purposes. It's entirely useless, and I admit that. It's useless in, I think, every product out there. It doesn't matter whether something's coming from the Netherlands or from even from Russia. They come from Russia not because Russia is attacking you. They come from Russia because it's easiest to get compromised or just purchase malicious machines in Russia and China. But apart from that, showing stuff on the map, nice to look at, probably useless. The group by report, you can have the most active hosts, you can have the rare actors, the rare hosts, rare internal IPs, rare ports, rare process names, and you can just create that from template and customize it. So you can say, I want to create that, specify where it's being sent. So this can be an email, usually. Specify the format, the sources you want to apply it to, let's say Active Directory. Even specify a report hour, because you may not want to receive it at 2 a.m. And yeah, then you can customize it. I'll then speak about the sources. So sources get created automatically if they're detected by the collector. I'll go through that in a bit. But then you can manually create a source as well, but you can also customize it. You have a lot of ways to customize a source, apart from the name and the description. The way that we consume Syslog is many different ways. We have to be flexible. So one of the ways is through the collector. We install the collector on premise, you point everything to the collector sends it to the server, everything's perfect. We have customers that don't want to have a collector. They don't have an on-premise infrastructure, almost none. So they want to just go for cloud. They have SentinelOne, they have Google Workspace, they have a few firewalls here and there, but those firewalls, they can be pointed to send logs over the internet if they use TLS, and we support TLS. So you can basically point something to us over the internet. There's an issue with that, and the issue is that we should be able to differentiate who's sending us what. So customer A sends us something, customer B sends us something, where do we show it? So you have a couple of options. You can, there is TLS, Syslog over TLS, which supports mutual TLS authentication. So you can download a certificate. It's generated specifically for this data source. And then you can upload it there if it supports it. And then we will identify you by that. There are other things like SentinelOne, for example. It has an account ID. It doesn't support, I think it doesn't support mutual TLS. So it has an account ID. And you can say, okay, this is account ID, and this is my particular account ID, and then we'll be able to designate to that place. It's not necessarily recommended to send that huge amount of logs over the clear internet, even encrypted, but some customers use that. For the rest, the collector is the place to send the syslog to. There's a risk level configuration. You say this is a data source that is very risky, so let's say to 90. This will affect the risk score of the alerts that you get related to that source. There are other factors as well, but that's one of the factors. Specify source category. You can specify retention period. As I said, it defaults to 30 days, but you can increase that to whatever you want. You can customize extraction in many different ways. You can do the data masking. Say, I don't want to see credit card numbers there, even if some developers somewhere forgot to do the masking at the application level, because, yeah, fun fact, they do all the time. So I don't want to see that. It will be pre-masked, pre-indexing. You can even group identical logs. So if something happens repeatedly, you can just compact them together. There will be an additional parameter that says number of compacted events, but that's it. You can actually even define properties that define this identity, because the log might not be entirely identical. It will have a timestamp which will be different. So you can say I want to define identity by this and this property, and then you can group them. Fine-tuning the sources is something boring, but also very, very important to get the right view in your SOC or whatever you have. You can then extract additional custom parameters using JSON path, XPath, regex. If, let's say, if some IP for some reason isn't extracted. Over here, by the way, is the list of standardized parameter names that we use. It is by the Elastic schema. We have a little bit transformed the Elastic schema to fit our needs, but they're taken from there, so it's something more or less standard. And you can say, okay, this is a client IP. and the client IP is parsed by this regex. IPs are horrible to parse as regex, by the way, but that's what we have. And yeah, you can discard logs that you don't care about with some custom patterns. You can even have custom visualization of the raw logs. So even, for example, if the raw log is XML, and you may have people that, we've had such cases, business people looking at some of the sources that have business-specific data in them. And you can say, okay, they can't understand XML, so let's transform the XML to a table. And we basically give you a way to put custom JavaScript over here to transform the way it's presented. Then there's the log integrity thing that I spoke about. I won't go into all of the details here, the public keys, the external anchoring, all of these things. I'll just mention that you have the option to generate a Merkle tree for all of the logs in this particular source, and also to generate a hash chain. It's recommended to have a Merkle tree for basically most sources, and hash chains for a bit more quiet ones because it's more resource intensive. But apart from that, yeah, this is the way you guarantee that. And then you can exclude threat intelligence sources. You can configure how often threat intelligence alerts are generated, because it doesn't make sense to have a new alert every time a malicious IP hits your firewall. They do that all the time. You may want to say, okay, give those just twice a day so that I can review all of the malicious IPs that hit my firewall. In the process, you can block them there, of course, if the firewall doesn't do that automatically anyway. But yeah, we don't want to swarm you with alerts. So these are all nice customizations. By default, things work okay. We also have the cloud integrations over here, the Azure, the Microsoft 365, AWS. In most of these cases, you either just click connect and approve, or specify a bunch of API keys and secrets. In the case of here, you can specify region. We support CloudTrail, GuardDuty, and S3 log fetching. Okta, the email is actually something very useful in some cases. It sounds strange, but some products can generate useful event information only by sending emails. They don't write text files, they don't like database, they don't do Syslog, they send emails. And so you may want to connect to an inbox which receives those emails, either via IMAP POP3 exchange, and fetch the emails, transform them to logs, and get them in the whole picture. Here we get to the collectors. You can download a collector for Windows Linux, and then you have the ability to install that. It's pre-configured for your account, for your tenant. Speaking of tenants, this is the way to create a tenant. You basically create a new customer. You can even nest them, so you can have a hierarchical structure of customers. This sounds strange. We have a partner that specifically requested that. And each tenant would have their own collector to download so that they don't mess with each other's data. They would have a separate account. They can log in, download the collector, or the MSSP can go and download the collector and install it for them. It will have the right credentials pre-configured during download. The collector has a UI, but sometimes you want to disable that, so that's also an option. And here would be a list of all the connected collectors. Same goes for the agents. I said they're optional. You can go without them, but they have some nice additional features. We actually use the Wazu or OSSec agent. It's a popular open source one. We parameterize it again, so when you download an agent here, it's already connected to your tenant, to your account, and sending logs directly there. Something probably a bit funny, when we implemented our integration with Wazu and OSSec, it didn't work in the beginning, the decryption part. So they have some encryption protocol, then send you the data encrypted, and you have to generate the key on the other side and decrypt it. Well, it turns out that they implemented their encryption protocol incorrectly in C. I personally discovered that in their C code, improper handling of hex characters. Reducing the key space significantly. So they basically operated only the key was not the bytes participating in the key were just the ASCII characters and nothing outside of that. They acknowledged the issue and are probably working towards fixing it. So we also did the broken implementation in order to be able to ingest those logs. So all of the registered agents are listed here. If there were tenants, so multiple customers with that account, you could download a per tenant installer for the agent and put it there. And as I said, you can even customize them with custom Windows channels. So by default, it would look for security, for application, and for system. But you can say, I have these very specific requirements that I want to monitor some other channels in the Windows logs. Let's go to the alerts. The alerts, you can specify so-called alert destinations. This is what happens when an alert is triggered. The most obvious thing is send an email. This can be a list of emails, can be a group email, can be whatever. You can send an SMS, a Telegram notification. You can very easily connect Telegram through our Telegram bot. Telegram bots, by the way, are also white labelable, so you can have a custom white label Telegram bot. And you can invoke an API or URL, or you can invoke an IFTT or Zapier recipes. You know, these services, they are usually consumer automation, but they're very useful for all sorts of automation. You can say, I want to invoke this recipe that it receives the alert data and then creates a ticket in Jira, or receives the alert data and sends a message to Slack. It's very straightforward to do that with IFTT and Zapier. I said you can also execute Python scripts or execute custom commands on the agents that are on the hosts that are affected by this alert. The demo account doesn't allow me to create post requests, so I won't be able to show you the options here, but they are execute custom command like kill, block IP, disable account, and you can actually block stuff on firewalls. We don't support all firewalls yet, full disclaimer, but we're adding support for them on the go. For this active blocking of IPs. Then you have the correlation rules, which we have a template library of around, I think 800 rules for various vendors and products. They are automatically created. So when Active Directory, for example, when we detect Active Directory, we automatically create all of the Active Directory alert rules above certain risk level. Each of them has a risk level. So for example, you select that one, select Active Directory and create it. Because it has a risk level of 40 and it would not have been automatically created, we would create the high severity and the medium severity and the user management out of hours. Out of hours is an important concept. So if you want to create your own rule or customize an existing rule, these are the screens basically. You specify the destination, so what happens? Send an email, send an SMS, create a ticket in Jira, how often it runs, every minute, sometimes it might be useful just every hour. Specify whether it runs outside or inside of working hours or every time, because changing user permissions inside working hours is something perfectly normal to happen every now and then from a privileged user. Changing permissions outside of working hours is worth reporting on. Then you have the rule name. By the way, you can tag it with MITRE tags. All of the template ones are also tagged with MITRE tags. So if I want it to be good with marketing, I'd say that we have applied the MITRE framework to our product, and we have. You can review them by a MITRE tag and say, let's see the entry, let's see the lateral movements. I mean, it's very complex task to properly map MITRE concepts to actual events. It's, I'd say, a research topic rather than just doing a few nice screens. Each alert has a risk level, it has sources that it's applied to, and then it has a sequence of events that should happen. So you can have a custom query, obviously. Every alert can also be translated every rule can be translated to queries, but you can say this is a login failed, more than 20 times within 5 minutes for the same user, and then that would trigger a brute force alert. You would automatically get these anyway, but that's an illustration of what you can do with custom alerts. You can make them more complex, so the login failed can be followed by login success, or it can be even followed by steps that say less than. So certain thing happened and then something didn't happen. So if you in the normal chain of events, you expect an administrator to log in, to do some management tasks, then to log out, and then you may, if something doesn't happen, the thing that usually happens within this time frame, send me an alert to check if something bad's happening. Then there's the statistical rules, which are they start similarly. You specify what happens, but then you have 2 periods. You monitor the last 4 hours in this case of activity. You split those 4 hours into 10-minute chunks, and then if, for example, there are more than 2 standard deviations, and that's the statistic part, in those 10 minutes compared to the normal behavior in the last 4 hours, send me an alert. That would be unusual spikes or drops in the activity. You can also filter events because there are scheduled jobs, there are time of day things, I mean, people getting out, getting to work, logging in. Obviously, that would generate a lot of spikes, but you get the idea. You can even do a group by, so you can say, give me that monitoring, but per actor. So for each user, monitor their behavior, and if there are 2 standard deviation in the changes of their behavior, then send me an alert. We actually have the so-called Healthcheck alerts, and whenever a data source is created, you automatically get a Healthcheck rule as well. Very important. If something stops sending data, you should check that immediately. And here's the magic machine learning. You can just enable it, specify a few parameters, tweak a threshold if it becomes too noisy for some reason, specify who gets the alerts, but basically that's how you configure it. It then runs on 20 days of historical data. It learns, it creates a model based on all the properties in those events, and then sends alerts. It's a black box. All unsupervised machine learning models are black box. This one is particularly selected to generate as few false positives as possible. It's called Isolation Forest, and it was sort of recently created as opposed to most machine learning models. And it was created with that task in particular, to really find anomalies rather than things that are a little bit out of the ordinary, but not really anomalies, which would generate a lot of false positives, and you would turn it off the second day. So you might, in normal circumstances, not get at all any notification from the machine learning, but if you do, it's something bad. You have the option to configure the working hours with holidays, you can configure them by source. So most of them can be 9 to 5, but certain applications can be used by shift workers. So you can configure those things there as well. And then something that probably every presentation should start with, but I'll probably end with it, is the alert screen. They're prioritized by risk level, which I said takes into account the risk level of data source, takes into account the risk level of the rule, as well as a few other parameters like how many hosts it affects, how many sort of critical or VIP assets it affects. Then you can review that. You can first triage it, check the list of events that are included, check what has been gathered, like associated users, external IPs, if there are any indicators of compromise. This is a threat intelligence match. And if these are demo alerts, so they have very, very little data in them, but when you click here, you get all of that information in a specialized alert screen, and you can do searches and reports on the particular alert itself. So all of the events associated with this alert, now give me who are the top process names with events in this alert. And we have case management, so you can confirm the alert and then assign it to case. You can dismiss all of the alerts today for that. You can dismiss all of the the new alerts with the same actor, with the same IPs, kind of standard functionalities. Case management is admittedly limited because we don't aim to be a specific case management system, but you have the active cases, you have the cases assigned to yourself, the resolved ones, case reports, basic functionality that's sometimes useful if you don't have or don't want to use an external system. And probably I'll end with a few management functionalities. The user management, usually very boring functionality to demo and to show on workshops. But the important part here is that you can assign users to data source groups. Here we don't have one, but if there was a data source group, you would be able to assign that user to a group, which would mean to a tenant. And so I want to create an account for a customer for only their tenant. And they can be a manager there or just a security analyst. You can assign users to individual sources, not just tenants. So let's give it access to these 4 ones and don't give them access to the other ones. That's also an option. We have an API, so everything in the product is available through an API. So you can push data, you can extract data via RESTful API. And also add custom thread feeds in addition to the ones that we consume already. They are open source ones, so it's the Limo. Sounds actually is a great place. The ICS, it's an aggregator for a lot of feeds. We consume all of them, so they're about 30 or 40, I think. OTX, where without it. And you can exclude some of those. You can make exceptions. For example, some of those sources include 111.888 as malicious. I don't know why, and they're certainly not. Well, in some scenarios, yeah, malicious actors are using DNS as a way to exfiltrate data. It's a complicated scenario, but basically you can exclude IOCs that are just false positives. And I think I'll stop here. I think we have a few minutes for questions, but that's how it looks. Oh, I forgot to show the collector, but basically you can add a connector for anything, for files, for Windows logs, for database tables that contain log information, Oracle audit logs, MS SQL audit logs, change tracking, logins, Exchange, SAP, Postgres, the leak credentials one that I mentioned, yeah, vSphere, Syslog, OSSec, flows, and other stuff. Here's the Honeypot. You basically can create the Honeypot, ignore some CIDRs, specify which protocols should be included. If by default, all of them are included: the SSH, the RDP, HTTP, HTTPS, and yeah, you start receiving data. For a Syslog connector, whenever for example, Firewall sends a Syslog message, we automatically create the data source in the SIEM. You can manually also create such sources and identify them by host. Sometimes it's a bit more complicated to get what the host is, so the host of the sending machine or firewall or whatever, because vendors are not interpreting the Syslog RFCs correctly, and they put whatever things they think are proper in the host part of the header. It's probably a separate discussion of why nobody's implementing Syslog correctly, but notice here that you don't have to specify your vendors. So you don't have to specify I want to add a Cisco firewall and then I want to add a Palo Alto and then I want to add something else. We do the detection automatically. So whatever you send to us, we detect the particular type and then parse it in their particular strange and out of the standard way. So I think that's in not so short, the capabilities and how to actually get it running, download a collector, install it, create a Syslog connector, and then start sending stuff. the Windows collector, final word there, very configurable, specified channels, sources, excluded, included, regex, remote, local, whatever. But an interesting thing, all of those configurations are actually stored in a YAML file. You can back up that YAML file, you can modify it manually, it's bidirectionally synced. So you can say, I want to change the Syslog TCP port, I want to check, switch the debug flag. You can do that from here, not from the UI. And you'll notice that all of the keys are encrypted. We have two ways to do that encryption, with a locally stored key, which is a bit of security to obscurity, but if you don't have proper key management, that's at the least thing that you can do. It's very useful for work with integrators and for support. You can basically send the YAML file for inspection by the partner without revealing any of your secrets. But you can also use HashiCorp Vault to store all of your secrets. It's kind of a secrets management tool. You configure only the Vault key over here, and then we do the secret extraction from the Vault whenever needed.